main takeaways when it comes to this tip is that one, if you're ever worried about the Excel formulas, you can always just go and do the math for it instead. Again, sometimes math is easier to conceptualize than these sort of Excel stuff, so no worries. You can always go back and manually add up each one if that is more comfortable for you. But the advantage to the formulas is that they will automatically update and they can save you a whole bunch of time when it comes to that then. Now, my next tip kind of goes hand in hand when it comes to this then. So this next tip is to say, let Excel do the math for you. So here's a tangible example that might come for a lot of the business owners here. Let's say that I'm a restaurant and I'm selling burgers and I'm selling hot dogs. Let's say that for each burger, I'm selling it for about $8, and each hot dog I'm selling for about $5. So I go in and I type in, $8 revenue on a per transaction for the hot dog, and about, or excuse me, for the burger, and about $5 of revenue per transaction for each of that then. However, I then got to think about my cost of goods sold. In order for me to make that burger, it might cost me $3 of materials to get that. And that, hey, in order to sell this burger, it's going to cost me $3 to get the beef, to get the bun, to get the cheese, a head of lettuce, so on and so forth. Maybe for the hot dog, it's only $2. $2 to get the sausage, to get the bun, some mustard, so on and so forth. Now, one thing I always like to do is to suggest let Excel do the math for you here. So if you can see for this, what I want to try to calculate is how much margin am I making on a per sale basis. Sometimes if you look at accounting, they might call this net profit in terms of what you make on a per transaction basis. But side note, I always like to use the term contribution margin. What I'm going to do is I want to try to figure out, hey, how much margin am I making for each of these sales? So I'm going to set up equals. Again, that's always the first letter or the first thing to type when you're making a formula. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the revenue minus that cost of material. So I take that revenue, this cell right here, I clicked right on it, and I'm going to subtract out the cost of material to get that. To say, I'm going to get $8 per burger, but it's going to cost me $3 to make that burger. And that gets me a contribution margin of $5. Now, for why I said the side note, that $5 isn't $5 in my pocket as profit. That's $5 to go and pay all of my other expenses, like my rent, my utilities, all those other overhead costs there. So if you ever wonder why I use the term contribution margin, that's why. Now, let's go ahead and do that same thing for hot dogs. I'm going to take that revenue at $5 minus the $2 cost to make those hot dogs. I'm going to get a $3 contribution margin. Now, let's say what I want to do is I want to try to find, hey, if I sell 100 hot dogs, how much is that going to be then? Well, one thing you could do, which I am not going to recommend right here, is I could just go in and manually type in 100 hot dogs times $5 gets me 500. And I can manually type in, excuse me, 100 burgers. And then I can manually type in 100 hot dogs times $3 gets me $300 in margin then. I do not recommend trying to do manual calculations like that then. Because the problem is that if you go and try to update this information, that information isn't going to carry over from area to area. What I recommend instead is to let Excel do the math for you. So let me unhide this area to reveal what I try to do instead then. So what I've done instead is I've now put this cell here, this how many burgers, and I've given it a spot to say, hey, I can put how many burgers I want in there. Let's put 100 burgers in there, and let's put 100 hot dogs in there. Well, when I say let Excel do the math for me, what I mean is don't manually type in 100 times 5. Have these cells calculate off of each other. So let me go down to revenue for burgers, and I'm looking at overall instead of per transaction. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that equals key, that same key to start all formulas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this one for revenue times how many burgers I want it to have then. So let me go ahead and hit enter, and it's saying, okay, I'm going to make $800 per burger, or well, $800 from burgers. Well, let's do that same math then for the cost of materials. I'm going to take that $3, times it by 100 for the number of burgers, and say, hey, it's going to cost me $300 to go and get all the patties, the buns, the cheese, so on and so forth. Then let's do that same math from earlier. I can do the 800 minus 300, and it gets me $500 of margin. Now, what is the benefit of having it, of going through this way as opposed to doing the manual method where you go in and manually type in 100 times 5? The benefit to this is, just like I explained in the last slide, these formulas will carry over from area to area. Let's say that I just got word back from my supplier, and it's going to cost me a whole lot more for beef patties. There's a beef shortage. It's going to cost me a whole lot more to make my burgers. Well, if I go up here and I change this cost of materials from $3 to $4, all of my math is going to carry over from spot to spot then. The reason why I recommend letting Excel do the math for you is that you want to make sure that when you go in and update your information, all of the rest of those areas are going to update themselves too. When I went and changed that that $3 to 4, it didn't update my manual calculations, but the formulas it did. Same goes too to say, hey, maybe instead of a burger, maybe for this burger shop, I'm expecting a big event coming up. And I'm not expecting to sell 100 burgers, I'm expecting to sell 500 burgers. Well, again, if I set those formulas up properly, and I change that from 100 to 500, well, it's going to update all of this math then as well. So when I say let Excel do the math for you, what I'm suggesting is set up areas where you type in the information and then use Excel to calculate off of those areas where you put information in. So that way, if you go in and update it, if you find out that, hey, I'm going to change the price of my burger from $8 to $9, or hey, it turns out that my hot dogs are going to cost me more to make, I'm going to put $3 for that instead. If you manually, if you set it up where Excel is doing the math for you, it will then carry over doing that math as other things come across them. So that's an important starter tip. A lot of people miss that one, but that's an important one when you're working, especially a lot in Excel. When you start having a lot of things going off each other, that sort of letting Excel do the math for you goes a very long way when it comes to making sure that you are keeping accurate tracking for that data then. The next tip to think about then is copying cells across rows or columns. So if you see this one labeled just one right here, it might be hard to see on the Zoom, but if you have Excel open, when you click on a cell, you might see this little square in the bottom right-hand corner of a cell. If you click on that little square there, what you can then do is you can drag that cell across different areas. So if you can see, I had this one right here. I clicked on that little square and I dragged it. Well, what Excel is going to do is it's going to copy that pattern across the way. So I had a 1 here. I have 1s all across the board. If I click on that little box, that little square in the bottom right-hand corner, it will carry that 1 all the way around them. Now, Excel is pretty smart with this, except you oftentimes have to give it more information. If you remember, when I first started this off, I only had 1 listed here. But let's say I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, oftentimes what you can do is if you give it a little bit of a pattern, it will continue that pattern then. So let me manually type in 1, 2, 3. And now if I highlight those 1, 2, 3, you can see that little square in the bottom right-hand corner is still there. So if I then highlight those 1, 2, 3 and then drag down with that square, it's going to actually go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, so on and so forth. So when you're using this sort of copying cells across areas, make sure that you give it a good pattern right off the bat then. Now, this copying cells works with other options then too. Let's say I want to set this up, I want to do some math, I want to add up this category plus this category. And you can see 1 plus 1 equals 2 then, right? Now, if I do that same, grab the square in the bottom right-hand corner and drag down, it's going to copy that math from across those areas. If you can see, it was 1 plus 1 in that area. Well, if I go down to the next row, it's adding the next one up 1 row down for that same area. If I click on this one, you can see it's adding up the 1 plus the 3, so on and so forth. So that dragging will still will still work regardless of what you put in there. And that's not just for manual math, it also works for formulas. So if I go in and type in sum, remember that sum version that sum statement I had earlier, and I say, hey, I want to add up all three of these rows next to me. Well, that sum is also going to keep that going, even if it's a formula too. So now what I can see is that it's adding up the sum for these areas here. If I go down to the next one, it's adding up the sum for those areas as well. That copying cells can carry over math and formulas as well. Now, the most practical application for this is typically when it comes to dates. Now, Excel can get a little bit funky with these then, but if you enter it in correctly the first time, and I'll have an intermediate tip that covers this if you are having issues, but let me just do the first of the month. Let me do 11/1/24. As you can see, it automatically formats November 2024. Now, if I go and type in this and I just try to extend that down, as you can see, it's going to assume with only one category here that it would be going every month. So with only one listing, it will showcase November, December, January, so on and so forth. So that copying still works even if you're not just using numbers, it works for other formats as well. Now, let's say here what I wanted to do was not the whole month, not of November 2024, but what I wanted to showcase was the day. Again, try to think about that establishing a pattern for it. So if I type an 11/2/24, again, and there's going to be an intermediate tip about the formatting for this then, but if you give me 1 second, let me format this as short date. And then I go 11/3/2024. Oh, come on. All right, there we go. So if you can see, now that I have it formatted as a 1, 2, 3 day, if I keep going down, it will then keep that same pattern going there. So it will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and go by date then. So that sort of clicking and dragging still works even if you're using dates as opposed to numbers. Now, the next intermediate tip builds upon that copying numbers in rows. So now that we're out of those beginner tips, we're going to be getting a little bit more advanced here. So when I talked about covering things across rows, what's important to keep in mind is what actually carries over between there. So this is a very similar page as what we set up before when I said to let Excel do the math for you. Well, let's try to set up that overview in that I want to say, whoops, these should be dollar amounts. $10, $10, $2, $8. So let me go do the math here. I want to say $10 per burger times 100 burgers. Okay, that gets me 1,000. That's what I was looking for. Well, let's say I want to extend that over. Let me go ahead and drag it out. Oh, wait, whoops. Why is it saying $0 for my cost? I know if I sell 100 burgers, it's not going to cost me $0, $0 for my materials, right? So if we click on this and see what happened here, when I made my formula extend over, it extended both areas. So it extended that from $10 of revenue, it did go correctly over to $3 of cost of material. But if we take a look at the burgers here, it also went over one, in that it wasn't looking at my burgers anymore. It was looking at this cell here, which doesn't have anything in it. The way you can get around that is by formatting your cells with these dollar signs in it. So if you see right here up in the top where I can manually type stuff in here, if I go to this D9 and I type in $D $9, what's going to then happen is that dollar sign codes Excel. So that way, when you carry the formula over, it's not going to move that specific one. So if I now copy these over 1, 2, you can see it's doing it correctly in that when I copied one over from revenue to materials, well, it did go over one in that it went to $3, but it kept that D9 in the same place. Same goes for margin in that I went over one more and it carried that same formula over. Now, it's important to remember when you're doing this then that you don't accidentally do it again in another way. So if I go down, I bring these numbers down in that I want to go from the $10 down to the hot dogs, which is $8. The problem I run into is when I copied it, I still had that D9 there, but I actually want this one on hot dogs. So this is a pretty easy fix if you know what you're looking for there. If you go in there, you can manually move that down from D9 to D10, but then just make sure that your other areas are adding up as well. So I want to make sure, again, that I have the proper versions in here. So maybe instead of 50 hot dogs, it'll be 100. And as I can see, it does update when I update that then. So again, another one of the benefits of when you let Excel do that math for you is that you can make sure that you can always double check it if you update those areas where you input the data. Okay, the next intermediate tip to look at is cell formatting. So remember how earlier I said, hey, we're going to be going over formatting in a page? Well, here we are. So I have this number 5 right here at the top. And as you can see on this left-hand side, I have some different category names. I have it listed as number, currency, accounting, percentage, a different version of percentage, and then fraction. Let's go ahead and take a look at these different formats in Excel. So let me go ahead and go full screen with this because it can be a little bit easier to display it in full screen. So you can see here on this page here, if you look up in this section right here, that's where you can see the formatting for your cell. So remember how I said number currency? Well, if I go down one, you can see it updates the currency. I've already manually done this just for demonstration. What I want to try to show you is how this number 5 is shown in each of those categories. So I'm going to set this equal to that 5. I'm going to set this equal to that 5. I'm going to set this equal to that 5. I'm going to set this equal to that 5. I'm going to set this equal to that 5. I'm going to set this equal to that 5. So as you can see, all of these cells are based off the same thing. They're all based off this number 5 right there at the top. But with that formatting, they're displaying in different ways. For the number version, it's displaying as 5.00 to show that to qualify as a number. For currency, it's a simple $ ahead of that 5.00. For accounting, it's a $ displayed off to the left. For percentage, it's 500% because 5 would be 500% then. For this percentage, I have this built where it's showing a whole lot more zeros there. I'll explain that in a minute. And then for this fraction, it's displaying as 5, but not over anything. Now, let's say instead of 5, a simple number like this, let's go ahead and use a complicated number. Let's go 23.75. And let me, copy the cells over so we can see how 23.75 is displayed instead. So if we take a look at this one then, similar different formatting's there in that for the number, it's displayed with those two dots. Currency is the $, accounting is the $, percentage has percentage has that, and then for fraction, it actually displays as 3/4 as opposed to that then. What about a really big number? Let's go, I'm just going to mash my keyboard. Maybe not that high. Let's go with this number then. Let's see how these look. Extend that over. Display that. Well, for number, it's just displaying it fully all the way there. For currency, it's putting commas in there for it being a larger number. Same goes for accounting. For percentage, it still has that in there. Percentage continued has that. Fraction has more information there. What about a negative number? Let me put in -5. Well, if I extend all these over another time, this is where we can see that difference of currency versus accounting. For currency, it'll just put -5, but for accounting, it'll put the 5 in parentheses. Gotcha. So basically, you can use that this formatting area if your information is displaying in an improper way. So remember when I said I was having issues with those dates? Well, one of those formatting options are different dates in here. So like if you see short date, long date, time, those sort of things, there are a whole bunch of options in there when it comes to the formatting of your cell. So if you go ahead and put something in there and you see it's, hey, something's looking off here, it's looking weird, it might be worth checking the formatting to see, hey, I don't want to display this as, 5 in parentheses. Somebody may not know what those parentheses mean. Let me put a negative sign there instead. Um, Now, one other thing you can do with this formatting is you can use this little icon right here with the zeros to add or subtract how many zeros it displays with. So you can see this percentage continued right here. What I had done was I had gone and added a whole bunch more zeros to it so it displayed larger than. But I can also go the other way. If I click the other side of this icon here, I can take away those zeros instead. And what Excel will do is it will just round off of those numbers then. So let's say that this was 2,387.56789. If I then take a look at this percentage, it will then update based off of that information then. To say, hey, it's not just 0.789, it might be 0.7890. Or if you go ahead and take away the zero, it will then round that last digit relative to that. The number is still correct, but the display may show it rounded. So if you can see right here how it's going from 0.79, and then if I take away a zero, it goes to 0.8. Well, that's because 0.79 rounds up to 0.8 then. So if you want to display your information or your data in different ways, this formatting area can be a helpful way to do that. The next intermediate tip is to hide columns or rows. So here's a sheet right here where I have revenue broken down on a monthly basis and then a quarterly basis as well. I have a formula here where the quarterly basis is just adding up how much it happened in the prior months. So quarter one is adding up January, February, March, so on and so forth. Now, what I want to do is I want to display this data right here just to show those quarters over time. But what happens is, remember, I was a good Excel person and I let Excel do the math for me. If I go ahead and delete those, well, then suddenly my formula doesn't work anymore because I've deleted that information for January 23 and so on. What you can do instead is you can do what's called hiding rows. When you hide a row, you don't display the row anymore, but it's still there. So you can still have math doing what it wants you to do. The way to do that is if you click on the actual numbers for the rows, like you see this 3, 4, and 5, when you click on them, it will highlight that entire row. Or if you click on the C, the D, and the E up here, it will also highlight the entire column. So no worries if you display it vertically or horizontally. This hiding rows or columns still works either way. Well, if I go ahead and highlight that row, I can then right click on that. And then if you can see, there's this option here that says hide. If I click on that, it will then hide that row to say, hey, January 23 is still there, but we're just not going to display it right now. You can even see that it goes from 2 to 4 as I scroll on here. That's to say that, hey, January 23 is still there. We're just hiding it so it's not displaying. You can do these multiple at a time. Let me highlight 2 rows. Well, I can go ahead and hide that. And now it still displays just that quarter that I wanted to do. Let's go ahead and do that for these other months here. Let's highlight those 3 rows, right click, hit hide, and yep, those 3 rows are gone. They disappeared. Let's go for that quarter. Let's go for that quarter. And hey, now I have a perfect to say, hey, I'm displaying each of these quarters. Don't worry, the math is still doing math there, but now it can be easier to present if I just wanted to look on it in a corner view then. So you can always use that hide option to hide those rows or columns if you're trying to find more information. If you are trying to display the information in a different way then. Now, what about when you're trying to track data yourself then? Here's a very expanded example. Let's say that this is one of those multi-million-dollar businesses where they're showing that revenue for multiple years. Like if I scroll down, we have January 23 here, and I scroll down, it goes all the way to projected for 2027. And if you can see here on the right, I have products 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, so on and so forth. If I go to the middle of this document, I'm lost. I have no idea where I am. I'm on this 1585, but I have no idea what that means. I have no idea what's going on then. Same thing for the 785. I can't tell what's going on there because I'm not seeing the titles for these areas. I'm not sure what the 785 is referring to. Well, one of the ways that you can get around that is using what we call freeze panes. So if you go up to this View tab up here at the top, so you know how you have Home, Insert, Draw, so on and so forth. If you go to the View tab, and one of the options then will then be labeled Freeze Panes. What freeze panes refer to is that we're going to freeze the display so you always see it, so that way it can be easier to help you track what's going on then. So if I click on this freeze panes, typically what works easiest is if you put those labels on the top row and the first column when it comes to this information. So I'm going to hit freeze on the top row. As you can see, sometimes it can be hard to see on the zoom, but it adds a little line there right underneath these product 1, product 2, product 3. Well, because I froze that first column, that product listing is going to stay there no matter how much I scroll down. If I scroll down all the way here to 2025, I can still see what products are still there. Now, that was for the first column. What about the first, that was for the first row. What about the first column? If I freeze that first column, it will also do that then for the left-hand side. So if I'm now looking through it and I'm trying to keep track of what date is there, well, hey, it's also going to freeze that left-hand side. Say, hey, I can now keep track of, hey, what time period I'm in there. And there are more ways that you can do this. Like if you click on this, then let me click Unfreeze Panes. And I'm going to highlight this and highlight this, freeze panes. That you can then have it where it will display both pieces of information then, if that makes sense. So you can have, basically you can use freeze panes to help you track your data as you're looking through it there. So freeze panes are an option to help make sure that you can keep track of your data as you're looking through it there. Now, those were the intermediate tips. So if all that has been reviewed for you so far, hopefully we're going to be getting into a little bit more complicated stuff. Now, one of the most helpful formulas I use when it comes to those large sets of data is what I call the XLOOKUP formula. So the way that XLOOKUP works is, let's say I have one of those big things of data where I have all those different products in all those different quarters then. If I click on that f of x, remember that right from the very beginning, the way to find those formulas, and I click on fx, I'm going to look for XLOOKUP. You can read exactly what it is here in the description. So it searches a range or an array for a match and returns the corresponding item from a second range or array. So, okay, basically what the way that XLOOKUP works is that it will return it will return a value based off of what information you provide to look for it. So basically what we're going to do to set this up is I'm going to say, hey, I want to look at the total revenue for different areas. So what I'm going to say is, hey, XLOOKUP, I want you to look in this row and then search for Q1 2023 or to search for Q3 2024. And if that sounds confusing, no worries, Excel will make this easier for us then. If I click OK, it will then provide descriptions of exactly what to put into this formula. So if you see this lookup value, on the description right here, lookup value is the value to search for. So basically, what you can then put in this area is, hey, this is the thing I'm looking for there. So let's say that what I want to find is Q4 2024. So I'm going to go ahead and manually type that in there in the page. I'm going to bring up XLOOKUP again. Basically, what I want to tell it is I want you to look for Q4 2024. And the lookup array is the area to find that. So if it's looking for Q4 2024, what I want you to do is I want you to search in this area. I want you to search in this area. I'll tell you what, I'll do it like this. I want you to search from D3 to D79 for Q4 2024. And when you find it, what I want you to return is the accompanying revenue value. So if I then highlight all of the revenue area, there it is. So if we take a look at what is going into here, what I'm trying to say is that I want you to look for Q4 2024. I want you to find Q4 2024 in this lookup array. So I want you to look in this date column to say, is it January 23? Is it February 23? So on and so forth. And then once you find Q4 2024, what I want you to give me is what information is the total revenue. So this X lookup can be a very helpful way for you to find information in a large set of data. Let me click OK. And what you can see is that if we look back at this then, it was searching for that Q4 2024. The lookup value is what I had listed as Q4 2024. It was looking to find that Q4 2024 within that date column, and then it returned the value of the total revenue. And so if I can see, if I want to double check it, if I go ahead and search myself and find Q4 2024, there I found it. And look, it actually returned the same thing of 193,000. 193 right there. Now, that was a whole bunch of information on the formula itself. Here's one of these helpful tips to help you keep track of these formulas. What I want you to do is, especially if you're working in complicated information, what I want you to do is I want you to mark specifically what cells you want to edit for this. So if you can see, as I set up this formula, let's say instead of Q1 2024, I want this to be set up to be Q1 2023. As you can see, the Excel will update and will find that. What I want to do is when I'm looking at this Excel document, I want to make sure I'm tracking which cells I should manually update and which cells are doing math and formulas here. So what I always like to do is I like to go up here into font. I'm going to expand it out the screen because sometimes it can be a little bit easier. You can see this highlight color right here. If there's a cell that I'm going to manually update myself, I always like to label it in yellow, and I like to use borders to put borders around it. Let me put all borders here, and I'll do thick borders. It can be a little bit easier to see that. So now that I've marked it in yellow and I can see that, it's a lot easier for me to track to say, hey, if I want to look through this sheet for one of those sets of data, well, I can find it. I know which one to update if I put that in there. Let's say I want to do 10/2023. Well, it will still update to find that then. I know myself that when I go ahead and type in this information, it will then find it within that sheet. I've tracked in that I'm going to be updating this October 2023, this cell right here because it's yellow and it has a border around it, and then this cell will find me that actual information I'm looking for. So the tangible tip is the formula of XLOOKUP, which you can use to help find through a lot of like big data sets. But for your making of the Excel sheets, it's a whole lot more helpful for you for tracking, to track it, to mark rather what cell that you want to update it by highlighting it and then putting that border around it. Another thing of when you're putting in these large data sets together is to try to double check your work by using something that we call show formulas. So if you can see up here on the top screen here, along this top tab where you have Home, Insert, Draw, one of these sections here is formulas. And if I expand this out to be the full view, it can be a little bit easier. Within this formulas tab, you have this button here that's called Show Formulas. If I go ahead and click on that, what the display is going to do is it's then going to show me in each of these cells, it's going to show me the formula for each cell as opposed to the outright number. So remember how I said earlier of let Excel do the math for you? This can be one of the easiest ways to double check if you actually have it set up that correct way. And also, if I follow my last tip, I want to make sure that these are marked. Okay, so now that I have these set up, what's it called? Where I can see the formulas, I can double check to say, hey, is this calculating the way I want it to be then? So if I'm looking at it, okay, C5 is multiplying times D10. So I'm still getting the $8 of revenue times D10. If I go in and change one of these manual cells, when I have show formulas, I mean, it won't show me the change in the result because the formulas are what I'm looking at right now then. If I go back and click off of show formulas, it will then showcase the updated amount then. So short formulas is a very helpful way to double check your work then, especially when you have a whole bunch of Excel formulas going on there. Again, it can be overwhelming when you have that sort of math building off of itself, like I mentioned earlier. But that show formulas can be a very helpful way for you to double check that sort of math there. Now, the last Excel tip I have for you today are ways to sort of display the information that you have about the data that you have for yourself then. So I have all this data here. I have January 2023 through a whole bunch of different times then. I have all these different products. Well, what you can do with Excel is you can use Excel to graphically display that data. Right now, these numbers, these 100, 105, 110, they don't really mean too much to me there. What I want to see is the sort of update process over time when it comes to these numbers. So what I want to see is I'm going to go ahead and highlight the information that I want to track. So I want to display all of these areas down here. Once you highlighted your information, you can then look on this Insert tab and then find a whole bunch of charts and graphs. What you can then look at is to say, hey, which of these graphical displays would make the most sense for me in order for me to make sense of this information? Well, what makes sense for me right now is maybe a line graph to say, hey, I want to track how this product one is doing month to month. So if I highlight that information, I go to this line graph display right here. I can then take a look at different options here of what makes the most sense. So here, maybe I go full screen there and it'll display a little bit better. So if I click on this, okay, click on this and then move over. Okay, well, it's kind of hard to see behind the screen there. But basically, like this first one here doesn't really tell me much because it's putting those 5 categories into one line, those five products. This one here of a stacked line, hey, that one makes a little bit more sense to me there because I can then see product 1 versus product 2 versus product 3. So you can see here, this is basically how those sort of products are performing over time then. So like, hey, it tends to be growing over time, maybe dropping off a little bit at the start of the new year, growing up over time. So that's how I can sort of visually display my information. If when I'm down in the numbers, looking at the 100 to 200 to 300, it can be hard for me to track that. But when I can see these numbers displayed graphically, well, it helps me show that, hey, I grow a lot. I've been growing a lot over time. But at the start of the year, there's a really big decline once maybe December, or once January rolls around or something else then. Now, there are a whole bunch of ways to display that data. Maybe instead of over time, where a line graph would make more sense, maybe what I want to see is, hey, I want to see a comparison of how product 1 is doing relative to the other products then. Well, if we go back to that insert area, well, if I want a comparison of one product versus another, it might be easier to use a different format like a pie chart. So here, if I go to pie chart, click on this, well, I can then see, hey, here's how much of my total sales for that are coming from each of these categories. So there's product 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Now, what's nice about these things is that if I go and update the information, it may then update the graph to display that then. The only thing is this one is being calculated automatically, so that one didn't really help. So here we go. So as I go and update that information, these graphs will automatically update to reflect that. So just like your formulas will automatically update, the same is true when it comes to the graphs for your information there. Now, there was a whole bunch of information on Excel. Go ahead and pat yourself on the back. This Excel stuff can be very overwhelming, but we've gone through the intermediate tips, the starter tips, and the expert tips when it comes to Excel then. Let me try to get through some fast tips when it comes to Outlook, when it comes to your emails then. So one tip I always love to recommend when it comes to your email. Where is my Outlook? Here it is. So one tip I always like to recommend when it comes to your email is to use color coding. So color coding can be one of the easiest ways to help certain emails stand out. So one thing I like to do myself is I like to put a blue marker on whatever email sent to me have a Zoom link in it. For this one right here, I have emails sent to me that have events listed in there. So if you can see, for this email right here, I have a Zoom link where I hosted this event on August 23rd. What I always want to do is I want to make sure that I can easily find emails with Zoom links. So what I would do is I would label each of those emails with a Zoom link with a color code. To add color codes to your emails, you can right-click on the email and go up to Categorize, and then you can very easily put those color codes on there. It's one of those things where it's often more intimidating when you start to say, hey, how do I want to categorize each of these? But you'll be surprised at how quickly you get used to putting different categories on there. It can help you keep track of your emails and that information a lot easier then. Another tip when it comes to Outlook is to archive your emails as opposed to deleting files. Especially in the modern day of online technology, you basically don't ever want to delete your emails because it's very common where information may come up where you want to go back to it then. What you can do instead of deleting your emails is what you can do is archive them instead. So if you see this this icon right here, this little green icon that has two squares on it then, instead of deleting it, if you just click archive, it will then go ahead and archive that email in a different area where you can track it a little bit easier, just in case something does come up then. So if I open up all my emails here, if I scroll down to archive, you can then see all the sort of emails that I've archived in there. Something where I'm already signed up for this event, I don't necessarily need to review this email, I can just go ahead and archive it and it will be hidden away as opposed to deleted and gone forever. You can still get those emails out of the way, you can still clear up your inbox, but archiving is a little bit safer when it comes to your data security there in terms of tracking that information. Another intermediate tip when it comes to Outlook is you can use a service called Bookings to help you track your calendar then. So here is a link to schedule a meeting with me. What comes up a lot with my business, with my work then is, remember how I said I meet one-on-one with those different businesses? Well, especially with me traveling around to all these different offices, what I really hate is that sort of email back and forth of, hey, does this time work for you? Someone else schedules with me in the interim. If you are subscribed to Microsoft 365, you could use what's called Bookings to schedule directly off of your calendar. So this is a link to my bookings right here. I have set up with different options where someone can reach out to me for a phone call, they can schedule a Zoom meeting with me, they can schedule an in-person meeting with me. This bookings speeds up a whole bunch of your time in Outlook because you can then just provide the link to bookings to someone to say, hey, if you want to schedule a meeting with me here, you can find a time directly on my calendar. So the way the bookings works is that you select different services that you have on there and to say, hey, if you want to schedule a meeting with me, here are your options. The way it works for the user is that you send that booking links to someone. They will then select which service that they want to do. So whether if they want to meet with you by phone call, Zoom meeting, in person, that's how I set mine up. You can then select which date or time works best for that person. So for that, maybe they wanted to select this time next month. They can enter in their contact information. They'll receive a confirmation and it'll be then be automatically built into your calendar. So if we take a look at my calendar right now, I actually don't have all that much availability left in November. So if someone wanted to schedule a Zoom meeting with me, if you can see, I'm available Monday next week, Tuesday next week, a few days the week prior. Not as much that week because I have some vacation at the end of the week, and then not as much last week of Thanksgiving. We go into December, I have a whole bunch more availability there prior to the winter holiday. And so you can use bookings to integrate with your Outlook options. So you can have it set up where someone schedules a meeting and it's automatically then put on your calendar. If I went ahead and scheduled this December 2nd Zoom meeting for 9 a.m. and then put in my information of John Doe, test@test.com, and click book, well then this meeting is then going to be put directly onto my calendar. No one else can book with me on Monday, December 2nd at 9 a.m. because someone has already booked that spot onto my calendar then. So bookings is far and away a very helpful tool when it comes to you helping with your Outlook and setting up your emails properly. Another very helpful thing, well actually I have notifications turned off there, but it showed up for a second where I have an email to say, hey, someone just scheduled a meeting with you. Another very helpful tip when it comes to bookings is to properly categorize your emails for tracking. So if you can see here, this is my email categories, and then I list them into different folders on the left-hand side. Working in my position where I'm working one-on-one with all those different businesses, there are a whole bunch of different people who I've met with over the years in my time here. So one thing that I learned very quickly that I had to do, and that in order to make sure I stayed organized, I had to put a different folder for each client I worked with. And then what I realized pretty quickly was that, hey, if I just have one folder named clients, well, suddenly I can't find anyone because those folders have so many different listings in there. What I did myself to organize it is I then listed it under different letters. So if someone's first name was under A, I would then categorize it under A then. And for confidentiality, I'm not going to expose who I'm working with right now. But in a nutshell, this has helped me track the sort of information of what people I've worked with before in the past. I use these same folders for other things as well. So for my drafts, for my email templates, I have different categories in here as well. So to transition into that topic, one expert tip for Outlook is that you can save yourself a whole bunch of time if you set up email templates. So if you remember from the bookings link, if you remember I had different options on how to meet with me, I said Zoom or phone calls. The way I set that up is that I have different email templates to send confirmation emails related to that then. So if someone wants to schedule a Zoom meeting with me, I have this email template right here where I can go in and update the name, I can update the date, the time, and make sure that we're all on the same page there. This saves me so much time to say, hey, you scheduled a meeting with me. I can then just hit Control C. I can copy this, put it in a new email. I can go ahead and type it up for them then. Instead of trying to reinvent that wheel and spend all my time typing the exact same thing over and over again, I can use these email templates to save myself time and to save effort there when it comes to that then. So this sort of common information, in that I tend to meet with people pretty commonly in Homewood. Well, for this template email, I have the address already listed there. I mentioned the parking already there. It saves me so much time not having to type that same address and that same parking information every time. It helps me streamline it to say, hey, I'm going to take this main information, put it in a new email, and send it over to the person so that way we're on the same page. And our last tip for the day, this is a small tip that may not seem important, but comes up a lot more commonly than you may think. One issue with Outlook is that it will automatically attach, like the default settings is that it will automatically attach a Teams meeting when you go to join a meeting there. So here's an example in that I set up a meeting with Zoom. I included a Zoom link right there. I sent that over to a client. Now the problem is that at the very bottom of that meeting request, Microsoft Outlook automatically attached a Teams meeting to it as well. So basically, even though I listed the location as Zoom, I put a Zoom link in there, it automatically added a second virtual meeting on the Teams instead. And so the problem that ends up happening is that when the notification joins up to join the meeting, it will still, it will give you a join online button, which links to the Teams meeting, even though that you listed the Zoom link as the specific location. This is one of those things of a lot of people miss this, especially if they don't work, like if they only meet via Teams instead of meeting by Zoom and Teams as well. But this leads to a whole lot of confusion in that, hey, I sent someone a Zoom link, they don't join, they join the Teams link instead, or vice versa. You can lead to a whole lot of issues there. And one of those things, the way to fix this is within Outlook. If you see here I am in Outlook. You go to File in the top left-hand corner. You'll then see this Options button in the bottom left. You click on Options. There's then an option for Calendar on this left-hand side. And then there's an option to add online meeting to all meetings. Now, I updated these screenshots, so it is the correct text, but from the last time I did it, they did update how exactly the settings look. So if you do this in the future, it may change, but this should generally be in the same area. What you want to do is that it defaults to having this add online meetings on. I would just make sure to uncheck that, just to make sure that you avoid any potential issues there.
Oh,
Um,
Johnny, we have less than a minute. This is
yeah,
about the
gotcha. And that's almost perfect timing in that was my last tip for the day then. Um, I appreciate all of your patience when it comes to these exercises. Excel and Outlook, it can be confusing there, so I appreciate your time here.
Well,
Um,
thank you, Johnny. We appreciate it. I will be sending out the survey and the PowerPoint with the tips and the tricks to everyone that's attended this event. We do have two upcoming events. We have a new website in which we're going to explain how to navigate our new website on November 6th. And it has a special members only section, so you might want to be a part of this and sign up for it. And then we have our last Power Breakfast meeting for the year, which will be on November 8th with Senator Jay Costa. This concludes our event. This was recorded. If anyone wants the recording, just send me an email and I'll get it over to you. Everyone have a good time, have a good day, and be safe.